The galaxy remembers every scream. It stores them in the iron of its weapons, the dust of its battlefields, the nightmares of its survivors. But there is no scream more hopeless, no prayer more unanswered than the one torn from a throat trapped in an Ork war camp. The Imperium tells its citizens that death is mercy compared to the Xenos. They are wrong. Death is release. The Orks do not kill you to end you. They kill you to watch you break. They kill you to laugh. And sometimes, they let you live just long enough to wish you hadn't. Yet somewhere in the filth, somewhere beneath the roar of engines and the crash of brutal laughter, a whisper survives, a single thought that the greenskins can never fully crush. Escape is impossible, but survival is a rebellion that Orks never understand. They expect you to die. So when you don't, something dangerous begins. Before we descend into that nightmare, breathe with me, just for a moment. If you're still here, if the grim darkness of the far future fascinates you the way it fascinates us, then support the channel. Like the video, subscribe, share it with someone who thinks they understand suffering in the 41st millennium. What follows will show them how little humanity is allowed to hope. There is a sound the universe should never have made, a sound that no human throat could form and no machine could imitate. It is thick and guttural, like a boulder grinding against bone, yet sharp enough to slice through steel and sanity alike. That sound was the first thing I heard when the Orks came. Not artillery, not orders, not the confident voices of the Astra Militarum telling us to stand firm. Just that raw, feral, hungry. It did not echo. It devoured the air. The sky above Vargan Secundus was grey with ash long before they landed. Weeks of shelling had turned the Manufactorum city into a graveyard of twisted iron and burned out hab blocks. We believed the worst was done. We believed we had survived. The Imperial Guard had pulled back to reinforce other fronts, leaving only scattered PDF units and terrified civilians behind. But we had power, we had walls, we had stubbornness. We told ourselves we could endure anything. Then the ground shook. Not gently, not like a tremor, but like something beneath the earth was kicking its way out. Children cried, windows cracked, whole slabs of ferrocrete loosened and fell. We gathered in the squares, clutching what weapons we could find. The air tasted like burning promethium. The Vox units screeched static. Somewhere someone tried to pray. Their voice cracked on the second line. When the Orks arrived, they did not cloak themselves in strategy or stealth. There was no warning, no scouts, no dropships cutting silent through the clouds. Their landing craft screamed through the sky like meteors wreathed in smoke and flame, engines coughing black exhaust. They slammed into the earth with the enthusiasm of lunatics eager to break something. And then the doors fell open. They came out laughing. I had seen pict feeds of them during training. Monstrous. Muscular brutes with jutting jaws and fists like anvils. But no image had ever captured the reality. Orks were alive in a way that was horrifying. Every movement was violence waiting to happen. Their eyes glowed with joy, their mouths gnashed with anticipation. They didn't march like soldiers. They charged like a stampede wearing armor made from scrap metal, tank treads, and stolen Imperial plates hammered together with brutal indifference. And they were enormous. The first one I saw was taller than any human I'd ever known, thick as a tree trunk, its teeth jutting like knives. It held a cleaver that looked vaguely like something a smith had once intended to be a machete, before changing his mind halfway through and deciding an axe was better. It ran straight through a line of PDF militia, swinging that weapon left and right. Men died too quickly to scream. Blood sprayed across the broken cobblestones. The Ork howled with laughter, as if butchery was a carnival game he meant to win. More greenskins poured out behind him, shooters barking, choppers hacking. Their guns were wrong, impossibly crude, barrels bent, magazines held with nails and prayer. Yet they worked. Explosive shells blasted through walls. Last rounds that should have pierced armor only annoyed them. Burning patches of flesh they barely noticed. I remember running, not because I was a coward, but because everyone ran. You cannot stand against an Ork horde with shaking hands and a half-spent laser gun. You run because instinct takes over, because survival screams louder than courage. We scattered through streets filled with ash and fire, ducking behind rubble, vaulting over bodies. Somewhere behind me, a siren wailed, its pitch warped by damage. Then the comm tower exploded in a geyser of sparks and shrapnel. We had been overrun in minutes. I tried to reach my family, my mother, my sister, but the roads toward the hab blocks were gone. swallowed by smoke and bodies. I climbed over a rusted pipeline and into the ruins of a manufactorum, where I had worked since the age of 13, stamping shell casings until my hands bled, and the overseer's servitors threatened punishment for slowing the line. In that moment, even that cruel predictability felt like safety. I heard footsteps. I ducked behind a broken conveyor. Voices followed. Raucous, simple words twisted into mockery of low Gothic. The Orks stomped through the factory, smashing machinery just to hear metal scream. One shot a press with his oversized slugger. The weapon detonated in his hand, blowing off 3 fingers. He laughed. Another Ork slapped him on the back hard enough to almost knock him over. That's proper shooting. The second one bellowed. That laughter was worse than any scream. It told me suffering meant nothing here. Then I heard something else. Crying. Human. Close. I crawled deeper into the manufactorum ruins, hands slick with oil and blood. The sobs came from beneath a collapsed bridge crane. A child, small, filthy, eyes wide with terror, sat trapped under a fallen support beam. A boy, maybe 8 or 9. His leg was pinned. His whole body trembled with pain. He saw me and reached out. "Help," he whispered. "Please." His voice broke me. I wedged my shoulder beneath the beam and tried to lift. It didn't move. I tried again. My muscles shook. My bones ached. The metal refused to budge. The boy sobbed harder. I grabbed a length of broken pipe and used it as a lever. The beam shifted a few centimeters, just enough to drag him free. His scream echoed through the dark, but even screams are salvation compared to silence. We crawled toward the far wall. For a moment, I believed we might slip out through a maintenance shaft or a supply tunnel. Then a shadow loomed over us, massive, hulking. The Ork blocked the exit with its bulk. Its skin was a sick, mottled green, streaked with scars and grease. It grinned at us, teeth jutting like bone spikes. "What we got here?" It growled. I threw myself over the boy, shielding him. My heart hammered against my ribs. The Ork laughed and reached down with a hand big enough to crush both of us together. It grabbed me by the back of my collar and lifted me off the ground like a sack of grain. My legs kicked uselessly in the air. Behind him, another Ork approached, dragging the child by an ankle. The boy screamed and twisted, tiny fingers clawing at dust and metal. The greenskins thought it was hilarious. "Disun looks scrawny," one snorted. "Chuck him into cages. Dar boss needs humies for the zoggin mechs." Cages. My blood went cold. I had heard stories. A mechanic on the factory floor once whispered that Orks kept humans alive not out of mercy, but amusement. They used us to haul scrap, to test weapons, to fight each other for sport. When we broke, they built trophies out of our bones. The Ork slung me over its shoulder. The world turned upside down as it marched through the ruins, smashing aside rubble with casual strength. Flames licked the shattered walls. Smoke choked the air. I twisted, trying to see behind us. The boy dangled like a rag doll in the second Ork's grip. He didn't scream anymore. He couldn't. We emerged into what had once been a transit yard. Cargo crates lay shattered. Transport vehicles burned. And everywhere greenskins swarmed. Hundreds of them. Some were massive knobs, clad in patchwork armor. Others were Gretchen, scampering like vermin, kicking bodies and rummaging through pockets for trinkets. A mech boy stood atop a broken tank, hammering a new cannon into place, using nothing but brute force and a welding torch that sparked blue fire. Every time the cannon sparked, nearby Orks cheered as if witnessing a sacred ritual. To them, it was. The Ork carrying me stomped toward a row of cages welded together from scrap metal, bones and whatever else they'd scavenged. Human prisoners packed the cages so tightly they could barely breathe. Some screamed. Some clawed at bars until their nails tore off. Others stared blankly ahead, souls already gone. The Ork threw me into an empty cage and slammed the door shut. My skull hit iron, blood filled my mouth. I pushed myself upright in the filthy straw. Across the aisle, the child was shoved into another cage, tossed like waste. His face was streaked with tears and soot. He clutched his broken leg, whimpering. No one comforted him. No one dared. Orks didn't just build cages, they built audiences, because suffering was their entertainment. Hours passed, or maybe days. There was no way to track time beneath the constant roar of engines and laughter. The greenskins held races with their crude bikes, smashing through wreckage and prisoners alike. They lit bonfires made from hab unit doors and broken statues of the Emperor. They scrawled glyphs in blood across the ruins. Night fell, though the sky never darkened fully. Firelight and explosions kept shadows restless. I learned quickly, do not speak loudly. It draws their attention. Do not stand tall. They like knocking things down. Do not fight the bars. They only laugh harder. And do not look the pain boy in the eye. The pain boy was a monster, even among monsters. He wore a surgeon's apron soaked in dried blood, and his tools were made from bones and rusted saws. He dragged prisoners away to fix them up. Some returned changed, arms hacked off, metal claws nailed into the stumps, eyes replaced with cracked lenses. Others never returned at all. When the pain boy approached, prisoners fell silent, too afraid to breathe. At first, the Orks ignored me. I was one more body, one more scrap of meat waiting to be used. But on the second day, if day still had meaning, I saw something that made the world spiral. The Orks brought in a new batch of prisoners, and among them was a soldier of the Astra Militarum. His armor was shattered, one arm gone below the elbow, his face half burned. But I recognized the regiment insignia on his shoulder, the 91st Mordian Iron Guard, discipline forged into bone. Even now he walked upright. When the Orks shoved him toward the cages, he didn't cower. He stared at them with cold hatred. One of the knobs stepped forward, towering over him. The greenskin poked the soldier in the chest with a chopper. "Bite me face, Humie!" The soldier spat blood into the Ork's eye. Everything froze. The knob's grin widened. "That's funny." He swung the chopper in one brutal arc. The soldier's head hit the ground before his body did. Blood fountained across the dirt. The knob roared with laughter, kicking the corpse toward the prisoners. I flinched instinctively, but some part of me understood something then. Something terrible. The soldier had died free. No cage. No toy, no obedience. For the first time, I envied the dead. The Orks tossed more survivors into cages. Men, women, elders. Even a servitor whose programming had glitched so badly it shook uncontrollably, repeating half-broken words. No one was spared. Those who begged for mercy were mocked. Those who prayed were beaten. Those who stayed silent were dragged toward the work pits. As night settled again, hunger gnawed my insides. My tongue felt like sandpaper. The child in the next cage had stopped crying. He stared blankly, shivering, lips cracked. I reached through the bars and touched his shoulder. He flinched, then relaxed, then leaned closer until his forehead rested against the metal. "What's your name?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know anymore. Maybe the fear had wiped it clean. I closed my eyes and tried to remember something, anything, before this. The manufactorum, the smell of hot metal and burned oil, my mother's voice, my sister's laughter. But even those memories felt thin, squeezed by the weight of terror. Here, identity was slipping away. Orks didn't just break bodies, they broke minds. On the third day, the cages opened. Not all of them, just enough. Orks stormed in, kicking prisoners awake. They pointed randomly, grabbing anyone who could stand. Some were chained together in lines, dragged toward the workyards. Others were dragged toward the arena. And a few, just a few, were chosen by the pain boy. When the pain boy pointed at the boy, I moved without thinking. I grabbed the bars and roared, slamming my fists against the metal. The greenskins turned. The pain boy's mechanical jaw clicked open and shut, as though amused. "Disun wants to go too, eh?" They opened my cage. The Ork who stepped inside didn't use his chopper. He punched me. Darkness exploded across my vision. I collapsed, gasping. The boy screamed. I crawled, blind, dizzy. But the Ork grabbed him anyway, dragging him away. The pain boy watched me with hungry curiosity. "You'll do," he said. He pointed at me. And in that moment, as they hauled me toward the operating slab built of bones and iron, I understood something horrifying. The taking wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, and I was still alive because they wanted me alive, a fate far worse than death. Now, the real suffering would begin. I did not remember being carried into the pit. I remembered the fists, the laughter, the sound of metal grinding against bone, and the voice of the pain boy humming some guttural rhythm as he worked. When consciousness returned, I was lying on a slab slick with dried blood. Shackles held my wrists. The room stank of rot and chemical bile, thick enough to make breathing feel like swallowing poison. Flickering lamps cast green light across a chamber carved from the belly of a wrecked manufactorum, its walls stitched together from rusted plates, engine tubing, and bones. The pain boy stood over me, up close. He was a horror carved out of madness, skin full of scars, eyes replaced with glowing augmetics, teeth filed into tusks sharp enough to crack skulls. His tools hung from a harness, saws and drills stained with blood, syringes filled with unnatural fluids, claws welded to metal handles. Every instrument looked stolen from a proper chirurgeon, then improved by someone who thought craftsmanship was a joke and suffering was a pastime. He poked my ribs with a syringe the size of a finger bone and grunted. "Scrawny, but we's fixed that." I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. My voice shook. "Please, the boy..." He didn't let me finish. His mechanical hand clamped down on my jaw with bone-cracking pressure. Humies don't talk in the pit. Humies squeal. The syringe drove into my neck. Fire seared through my veins. The world curled in on itself. For a moment, I thought I was dying. But the pain boy wanted the opposite. He wanted me alive enough to feel everything. The other orcs laughed as my body convulsed. When the pain boy finished with me, they dragged me off the slab and threw me into a cage far below the surface. I tumbled down a metal chute slick with blood and oil, slamming into a heap of bodies at its end. Some were alive. Many were not. This was the pit. A cavernous hollow beneath the camp, carved from earth and fortified with rusted tank hulls. Bones reinforced the walls, skulls, spines, ribs stacked into macabre architecture. Fires burned in oil-filled trenches. Gretchen scampered between the bodies, poking prisoners with sticks, laughing when someone twitched. Orcs above the pit tossed scraps of food down like zookeepers feeding animals. No one ate the scraps. They were bait. 2 prisoners ran for the meat, starving. The moment they reached it, a metal cage snapped shut around them, suspended by chains. The orcs above cheered wildly. One pulled a lever. The cage rose, jerking the prisoners off their feet. Another lever dropped it into a pool of green sludge. They screamed as the acid ate through skin and bone. When it was done, the orcs laughed louder, as if the suffering was a hymn. We were not here to live. We were here to amuse. Hours passed, or minutes. Time in the pit was measured in screams and silence. I crawled into a corner, leaning against a rusted plate that stank of fungus and blood. My body shook from the pain boy's injections. Legs numb, vision blurred, muscles spasming without warning. The pit had no water, no shelter, no mercy. If you needed warmth, you huddled against the dying. If you needed food, you learned to eat fungus scraped from the walls and prayed it wasn't venomous. Some prisoners sat in a circle near the far wall. Old soldiers, ex-workers, one man with a half-melted augmetic eye. They whispered quietly, like words themselves were danger. I listened, at first only to distract myself from the boy's absence. One said, "Orcs don't kill quick. They break you. They tear you apart in pieces." Another answered, "The pain boy likes to add weapons. Knives for arms, metal jaws. He makes you fight your own kind." The third muttered, "Better to run into the chopper. End it fast." They fell silent when I approached. A woman glared at me with feral suspicion. Sharp cheekbones, sunken eyes, fingers curled like claws. She had the look of someone who had survived too long in hell. "Don't come closer," she whispered. "You're new. New ones panic. Panic gets everyone killed." I slid down beside them anyway. My limbs trembled. "Where's the boy?" They did not answer, because they already knew. He was with the pain boy. Or worse, something scraped across metal. A gate above opened. A cage was lowered into the pit, held by chains. 2 bodies lay inside. One was alive, barely. A woman, eyes wide and white, skin burned, hair scorched. The other body, what was left of it, had been taken apart. Limbs scattered, skull split open, spine dangling by threads of sinew. The orcs roared with approval. One of them shouted, "Good scrap for the grot stew!" The cage door slammed open. The living woman crawled out like a wounded animal. The guards kicked her toward us and threw a cracked canteen at her feet. A test. Water clean. The most precious thing in the pit. She reached for it, trembling hands brushing the metal. Someone moved to grab it first. A starving man, ribs jutting beneath grey skin. The woman lunged backward, clutching the canteen like a newborn. 2 others rushed forward. In seconds, it became a frenzy. They clawed, bit, punched. A boot struck someone's throat. Fingers dug into eyes. They fought like beasts, because hunger and thirst stripped away everything civilized. The orcs above cheered. When the woman finally staggered away, she clutched the canteen to her chest, blood dripping from her face. The others lay on the ground, broken, some dead, some not yet. She lifted the canteen to her lips. Nothing came out. It had been empty from the start. A joke. A game. Her scream was long and hollow, a sound that belonged to no living creature. She collapsed, curling into herself. The orcs lost interest. They wandered off, bored, their laughter fading. That was the first lesson of the pit. Hope was a weapon. The orcs used it to peel the soul apart. When the fires dimmed, darkness settled across the chamber. Some prisoners slept, others cried quietly. A few stood like statues, swaying on their feet, too afraid to close their eyes. I leaned back, staring upward at the crooked metal ceiling woven with bones and mechanical debris. Every now and then, an engine rumbled above, and dust drifted down like grey ash. My mind replayed the Pain Boy's voice. Humie's squeal. If the boy was still alive, he was squealing somewhere in the dark, begging for someone to help, and no one could. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I forced myself to remember my mother's voice, my sister's smile, the warmth of a home long gone. Terror tried to drown those memories, but if I lost them, I would become one more broken body waiting for a greenskin to smash. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Small, rapid, scraping. I froze. A group of Gretchens scurried into the pit carrying buckets. They kicked bodies and poured foul-smelling water onto the survivors. A grot grinned at me, its needle teeth glinting. It tossed something wet and slimy at my feet. Meat. Rotting. Human. The grots cackled and scampered away. A man near me crawled forward, grabbed a chunk and stuffed it into his mouth. Another ripped a piece from his hands. The woman from before stared at the meat for a long moment, then violently shoved it away, sobs shaking her thin frame. I didn't touch it. Not because I was strong, because I was afraid I would. That was the second lesson of the pit. The orcs didn't destroy humanity. They made us destroy ourselves. Days blurred. The Pain Boy's injections worked their way through my blood, twisting strength and pain together until my muscles felt like they were being bound with wire. Some mornings I could barely move. Others, I felt powerful enough to tear stone apart. The body didn't understand what the brain refused to accept. The orcs were preparing me for something, for a purpose. One night, if night still existed, the ground trembled as engines roared overhead. A fight broke out in the camp. I heard the crack of gunfire, explosions, screams that did not sound human. A distant horn blared, a deep, thunderous sound that made every orc howl with delight. Wah! Was coming. Greenskins lived for war, and war meant fresh prisoners, fresh toys, fresh entertainment. The gate to the pit slammed open. Orcs marched in, dragging chains. They pointed randomly. You! 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 When the chain wrapped around my throat, I didn't resist. The woman to my right grabbed onto me, pleading under her breath to be taken with us, to leave the pit for anywhere else. One of the orcs kicked her aside. Her ribs cracked like brittle sticks. They hauled us out of the pit and up into the main encampment. I saw the camp fully for the first time. It sprawled across the ruins of Vagan Secundus, built from smashed tanks, shattered manufacturing machines, ruined churches and bent rebar. Giant banners covered in crude glyphs fluttered in the oily wind. Massive wah! Engines belched black smoke into the sky, making the air taste like burnt rubber and gasoline. Orcs raced stolen trucks in circles, engines screaming, weapons firing at random. Gretchen scurried underfoot like rats. Stompus and Death Dreads stomached forward, each step shaking the earth. In the center of it all, towering above the madness, stood the war boss. He was a mountain of muscle and metal, covered in trophies, skulls, helmets, tank treads welded to his shoulder. His power claw crackled with stolen energy. His eyes glowed red with feral delight. When he roared, the entire camp roared with him. He pointed to the horizon. A city burned there. The Wah was moving. They packed us into cages mounted on crude wagons pulled by armored squigs and ramshackle trucks. Engines sputtered. Tires spun through mud and rubble. The convoy shook the ground as it rolled forward, part army, part carnival of brutality. As the camp disappeared behind us, I saw the pit one last time, a hole in the earth, filled with voices, filled with screams, and I realized something brutal. The pit was not for killing. It was for shaping, for softening humans until fear hollowed them out. Because the orcs were not done with us. Not yet. We had another purpose. Not to live, not to die, to entertain. And as the convoy rattled across the corpse of my world, chains cutting into my wrists, the Pain Boy's chemicals burning beneath my skin, and the war boss roaring for blood beneath the burning sky, I understood the final truth of the pit. The worst part of being a prisoner of the Orks wasn't the pain. It was knowing that pain was only the beginning. The Orks did not build roads. They carved wounds into the earth and drove their trucks across them until the ground learned obedience. Our convoy rattled through ruined farmlands and burned settlements, across the shattered highways that once carried trade and pilgrims. Now they carried only cages, dragged behind engines that screamed and sputtered and belched smoke. The chains shook with every jolt, scraping my skin raw. The others clutched the bars, their eyes wide, hollow, reflecting flames that never seemed to go out. Ahead, rising like a broken tooth from the land, stood the arena. It had once been a cathedral, a great stone monolith crowned by stained glass spires and statues of saints. Now the glass was shattered, the saints defaced, and the sacred pillars had been torn down and rebuilt as crude stands for orcs to gather and roar. Giant banners draped the structure, each painted with crude glyphs and symbols of Gork and Mork. Flood lamps stolen from manufactorums lit the arena with sick green light, turning everything inside the cathedral into a blasphemous theatre. The organ pipes had been hammered into loudspeakers. Whenever a horn sounded, the entire structure shook, as if the saints themselves were trapped inside, begging for release. Our cages were hauled into the center of the arena and dropped there. Dust billowed around us. The Orks stomped into the stands, bellowing and shoving, eager for blood. They carried choppers and shooters, trophies and skulls, stomping and cheering like children at a festival. Drums thundered, made from tank hulls and human skin stretched tight. The war boss took his throne atop the old altar, now twisted into a platform covered in skulls. The pain boy stood below, fidgeting with tools, drool dripping from his broken tusks. Gretchen scurried around us, unlocking cages and chaining wrists together, dragging some prisoners toward work pits, others toward the center. Not everyone would fight. Some would be food, some would be targets, some would be turned into exhibits for the Orks to laugh at. The gate to my cage slammed open. A chain snapped around my neck and dragged me out. Mud swallowed my feet. Oil and blood soaked the ground. The air tasted of promethium, ash, and rot. My muscles trembled with the pain boy's chemicals, strength surging unpredictably through my limbs. It made me stronger, faster, but it came with pain, sharp and electric, lancing through my bones. A grot cackled and shoved a jagged blade into my hand. It wasn't a weapon. It was a joke, a child's toy of metal shards wrapped in torn cloth. Above me, the Orks howled with laughter. The war boss stood and raised his power claw, crackling with stolen energy. Everything fell silent for a heartbeat. His voice rolled across the arena like thunder. This one fights. Two figures were thrown into the arena opposite me. One was a prisoner, young, gaunt, eyes wide with terror, wrists bound with chain. He stumbled when he hit the ground, crying out as his knees scraped over jagged stone. The other was not human. It was something the pain boy had made, an improvement, a man, once, now twisted into a metal-limbed abomination. His arms had been replaced with curved blades. Steel plates had been bolted to his spine. A crude power pack pumped chemicals into his veins. His mouth had been sewn shut, and in his eyes there was no recognition, only madness. The Orks stomped their feet. The pain boy leaned back, eager to watch his creation work. A horn blared. The monster lunged. The prisoner ran. He didn't have a weapon, didn't have armor, didn't have a chance. He reached the arena wall, clawing at it, trying to climb, slipping on blood. The creature reached him in 3 strides. The blades rose. I moved before I had time to think. The chain jerked my neck as I ran, dragging me to my knees. I yanked it free with a burst of strength not entirely my own. Then I threw myself at the twisted abomination, driving the jagged blade toward the cables feeding its power pack. Steel screeched. Sparks burst. The creature turned on me. It slammed into my chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. Pain exploded through my ribs. I rolled across the mud, barely seeing the blade arm as it swept toward my throat. I ducked, crawling through the dirt. The prisoner screamed behind me. I grabbed a length of broken metal pipe from the ground and swung it blindly. The pipe struck the chemical tubing on the creature's spine. Acidic green fluid sprayed. The monster spasmed, screeching through sealed lips, then staggered back, arms jerking. Its blades carved deep ruts into the ground as it convulsed. The Orks booed, annoyed. They wanted a longer show. They wanted to watch fear stretch into madness. The prisoner crawled toward me, clutching his bleeding arm. "Help, please." The monster rose again, still alive, still moving. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to flee, to hide, to pretend the chains still held me and I was helpless. But the prisoner's voice didn't sound like a stranger's. It sounded like the boy's voice, echoing through the pit, begging. So I moved. Not because I was brave, because I could not live with the guilt of doing nothing. The creature charged, blades raised. I grabbed the broken pipe with both hands and swung with every scrap of strength left in me. The pipe jammed between its ribs and the metal plates. I dug it deeper, screaming as the pain boy's chemicals set my muscles on fire. The monster thrashed, flinging me aside. The world spun. Mud filled my mouth. I rolled onto my back as the creature loomed over me, blade descending toward my skull. Then a gunshot echoed. A lashbolt seared the creature's torso, punching through the chemical pack. It burst open. Fire swallowed the monster's back. It shrieked and collapsed, twitching, sizzling, until nothing moved but smoke. The arena fell silent. The orcs stared. Not at me, at the prisoner who held the last pistol. He must have found it in the mud, or a grot had dropped it, or the Emperor himself, in some cruel joke, had placed it there as a spark of hope. It didn't matter. The orcs roared in fury. The warboss pointed at the boy, and every greenskin leaned forward, eager to see him torn apart for daring to fight back. A klaxon blared. The sound echoed through the cathedral walls. Orcs turned, confused. The warboss snarled. The pain boy shrieked curses. An explosion rocked the entrance. A truck burst through the stone archway, blasting rubble across the arena. It swerved, nearly tipping over, and smashed into a group of orcs. A figure leapt from the passenger side, lean, masked, wearing scavenged armor and a tattered officer's coat. Human, alive, a rebel. The truck's driver, another human, leaned out with a stolen shooter, spraying bullets wildly. The orcs bellowed with excitement, charging the vehicle. The masked rebel sprinted toward us, sliding across the mud, grabbing the prisoner and hauling him upright. "Move if you want to live," she shouted. Her voice was sharp, commanding, the kind that broke shock and forced action. She cut my chain with a stolen power knife and tossed me a proper blade, still coated in green orc blood. The stands erupted into chaos. Orcs dove into the arena. More trucks rammed through the ruined walls, driven by rebels wearing scavenged armor and their dead comrades' tags. They weren't an army. They weren't trained. They were desperate, and desperation made them fearless. One rebel tossed a grenade at the altar. The explosion shattered the warboss's throne. The warboss roared, ripping apart two rebels with his power claw as if they were stuffed dolls. But more arrived, firing into the stands, dragging prisoners from cages. The masked woman grabbed my arm. "If you can run, run." I hesitated. The pain boy was scrambling toward the exit, his tools clattering around him, shrieking insults and curses in guttural Orcish. And behind him, dragged by a chain, barely conscious, was the boy. He was alive, badly injured, but alive. I tore away from the rebels and ran. Orcs surged into my path. I dodged one, stabbed another in the knee, tripped, rolled, sprinted. The pain boy turned and saw me coming. His eyes widened. He raised a needle-tipped device, aimed at my throat. A gunshot cracked. The pain boy's hand exploded. He howled. The masked woman had followed me, firing with a stolen slugger. I reached the boy. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. His skin was pale. His wrists were cut and swollen, but he was breathing. I lifted him onto my back. He was light, too light, as if the pain boy had taken more than blood. We ran, through broken gates, through smoke and screaming, through orcs crashing into one another, too frenzied to notice two humans slipping through the chaos. Outside the arena, rebels rallied around their trucks. Some were wounded, some were dying, but all were fighting. One shouted, "Get in! Move!" We threw ourselves into the back of a truck, bodies piling over us for cover as bullets tore through the air. Engines revved. The convoy sped away, smashing through barricades, racing across the battlefield as orcs fired wildly behind us. The warboss roared and leapt after us. For a moment he seemed almost fast enough to catch the truck, his power claw snapping inches from the tailgate. A rebel on the roof hurled a grenade into his face. Light and fire swallowed him. The explosion threw him backward, roaring, rolling through flames and rubble. The rebels screamed victory. but no one believed it. War bosses didn't die that easily. Hours later, the truck rolled to a stop inside a ruined hab block deep in the wasteland. The boy lay in my lap, breathing weakly. The masked woman approached, pulling off her mask, a human face, hard, tired, alive. She looked at the boy and shook her head. He needs a real chirurgeon. We don't have one. I held him tighter. Don't let him die. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to decide whether hope was a luxury or a weapon. Then she said something no one had said to me since the world ended. We'll try. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story, but she had taken on the Orks with stolen guns and battered trucks just to save strangers. For the first time since my capture, I felt something dangerous. Not victory, not safety, possibility. But the war boss had seen us escape, and Greenskins loved nothing more than the promise of a rematch. Somewhere in the burning ruins, the Wah was already turning to hunt, and we were too few, too wounded, too human to outrun them forever. Night in the wasteland was colder than the Orks ever allowed inside their cages. The wind crawled across the cracked plains, pulling sand and scraps of rusted metal with it. Every shifting shadow felt like a predator waiting to pounce. The rebels had no campfires, no lanterns, nothing that would mark their presence. They moved through darkness like ghosts, carrying wounded, whispering orders, always listening for the distant rumble of engines. The boy lay on a makeshift stretcher in the truck, wrapped in torn cloth, breathing so shallowly that every minute felt like his last. The masked woman, Captain Lyra, as I finally learned, kept pacing beside him, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. When we were far enough from the arena, the rebels abandoned their vehicles. Trucks were fast but too loud, and Orks tracked sound like hounds. We travelled on foot through ravines and rockfields until the smoke from the arena no longer stained the sky. Only then did Lyra speak to us without whispering. No talking above a murmur, she said, kneeling. No bright gear, no sudden lights. They're out there. She pointed toward the horizon, where faint sparks of green glowed like baleful stars. Engine lights, Ork search patrols. She turned to me. Can you carry him? I nodded. The boy weighed almost nothing now. I lifted him onto my back, careful of the cuts along his ribs. His breath shivered against the nape of my neck. He was burning with fever, but even fever was a sign of life. We walked. Hours blurred together. Every step felt stolen. Every silent mile felt borrowed from death. Lyra walked near the front, her silhouette moving like someone who had lived too long on the edge of survival. Rebels followed in a loose file, some limping, some with arms slung around comrades' shoulders. No one complained. No one asked questions. Everyone stared at the horizon, where the faint glow of Ork lights never seemed to disappear. When dawn threatened, Lyra raised her hand and crouched near a rock outcropping. We followed. Sunrise would reveal us. Orks loved hunting at dawn. The rebels pushed aside slabs of stone, revealing an underground tunnel entrance nearly invisible from above, a dead hive vent. We slipped inside, sealing the hatch behind us, leaving the wasteland silent once more. The tunnel was dark, smelling of machine oil and stale air. Rusted pipes lined the walls. The rebels lit dim chemical lamps, just enough to guide us, not enough to be seen. I felt the boy's forehead. His skin was ice now, his breaths thin and shallow. Lyra watched me, expression unreadable behind the half-shattered rebreather mask she wore. She motioned for me to lay him down on a workbench within a small side chamber. She rummaged through a battered medkit, pulling out injectors, stitching needles, trauma foam. What happened to him? She asked. Pain boy, I said. The word tasted like rot. Chemicals, surgery. I don't know what else. She didn't need more explanation. Her eyes hardened. She injected stabilizers, tore open his tunic, and pressed nutrient paste against his cracked lips. Some of it spilled onto his chin. His eyes fluttered, but he did not wake. The rebels stood in the shadows, watching silently. Some crossed themselves. Some turned away. He's strong, Lyra said softly, more to herself than to me. Most don't survive the pain boy's claws. I sat beside him. My hands trembled. I didn't know if I was shaking from exhaustion or fear or something sharper. Until now, the boy had been proof that humanity still existed. That even in the pits, even in the arena, someone had something left to lose. Lyra set a hand on my shoulder. Get some rest. We'll need every strong body if the Greenskins find us. I didn't sleep. Not fully. The darkness was too quiet. After so many nights of screaming engines and Ork laughter, Silence felt like a trap, ready to spring shut. Still, I drifted, and in the half-dream state between waking and oblivion, I heard them. The prisoners from the cages, their voices, their final moments, their terror ripping through the dirt. I awoke gasping. The boy was still breathing. Hours passed. The rebels kept watch. Some cleaned weapons, some slept sitting up. Lyra studied a data slate, its screen cracked and failing, showing a map of the local region. Red zones where Orks ruled, yellow zones where rebels might hide. There were no green zones, no safe places. "We can't stay here," one rebel, Soren, muttered. "They'll smell our trail," Lyra nodded. "We move by night, find the old command bunker in the hills. If it's intact, it might have supplies. And if it's crawling with greenskins?" Another asked. Lyra looked up. "Then we die somewhere that isn't this." They didn't laugh. They didn't argue. They accepted it as truth. This was resistance, not glorious, not heroic. Desperate. Just before nightfall, the hatch opened again. A scout dropped into the tunnel, panting. Mud caked his cloak. His voice shook. "They found the trucks. Orks are sweeping the area. We have less than an hour." Lyra stood instantly. "Pack everything, quietly." We lifted the boy onto a stretcher. The rebels shouldered supplies. We filed into the tunnel mouth, moving deeper into the labyrinth beneath the wastelands. These tunnels had once fed power and air into nearby hab blocks. Now they were tombs. More than once, we passed skeletons slumped against walls. Civilians who had fled here when the Orks first landed. Their skulls looked like they were still screaming. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, where old rails and transport carts rusted in silence. A faint breeze drifted through, stirring dust. It smelled of wet stone and mold, but no Orks. For now. Lyra halted. She tilted her head, listening. The rebels froze. A distant echo. Metal scraping metal. At first I thought it was the wind. Then it came again. Slow, dragging, rhythmic, coming closer. Soren whispered. "What is—" Lyra clamped a hand over his mouth and pointed upward. Something was walking above us. Something heavy. We moved faster, but quietly, hugging the wall of the tunnel, edging toward a side passage. The metal scraping grew louder. It didn't sound like Ork boots or truck engines. It was slower, methodical, like claws dragged across steel. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Sickly green. Lyra whispered, "Run!" We bolted. The tunnel narrowed, twisting through collapsed stone. The boy bounced on the stretcher, his breath hitching with every jolt. The rebels swallowed panic as the glow brightened behind us. The scraping became a howl of metal on metal, a shriek that made the hairs on my neck rise. We turned a corner. The noise disappeared. Silence swallowed us. The rebels sank to their knees, panting, wiping sweat from their faces. Lyra leaned against the wall, trembling for the first time since I'd met her. "That wasn't Orks," Soren whispered. "No," Lyra said. "Worse." No one asked what she meant. We moved again, faster now, until we found a rusted service ladder leading back to the surface. Lyra climbed first, pushing aside rocks that sealed the hatch. Cold night air rushed in. Stars shimmered overhead, faint and colourless through ash clouds. We emerged into a rocky hillside surrounded by petrified trees and shattered masonry. The boy stirred, eyes half open. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't let them take me back." "You're safe," I told him. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. We built a crude camp among the stones, using canvas and thermal blankets. The rebels lit no fire. The boy slipped in and out of consciousness, murmuring things I couldn't understand. The pain boy's voice echoed from his lips, poison hidden in his words. "Burn. Everything. Little Humi. Make it scream." Lyra knelt beside him. "He's hallucinating. The drugs are eating his mind. Can you save him?" Her silence was colder than the wind. Morning came, grey and bleak. The rebels prepared to move. Before we could pack, the hillside shook with distant explosions. Columns of smoke rose beyond the horizon. Ork war horns bellowed, rolling through the hills like thunder. Every rebel froze, eyes wide. "They found us," Soren hissed. Lyra cursed under her breath. "We're out of time. Get the boy up! Move!" But before we could lift him, the earth trembled again. This time closer. Stones rolled down the hill. Birds burst from the trees, screeching. Lyra lifted her rifle, scanning the terrain. "Not Orks," she said softly. Figures emerged from the northern ridge. Tall, armoured. Their silhouettes gleamed under the miserable sky. For a heartbeat, every breath stopped, not greenskins, astra militarum, real soldiers, real weapons, regiment badges scorched by fire and dirt. They approached cautiously, rifles aimed but not firing. Their lieutenant, face scarred, armor battered, stepped forward. "We saw your fight last night," he said. "Orks have your scent. They're hunting hard." His eyes drifted to the boy. "He alive?" "Barely," Lyra said. The lieutenant knelt, checked the boy's pulse, frowned. "What did they do to him?" "Pain boy experiments," she answered. "We saved who we could," the lieutenant exhaled slowly. "We have a field chirurgeon a few clicks north, but if we move, we'll draw attention." "We can handle that," Lyra said. He studied her. "What are you?" "Survivors." It was enough. The guardsmen formed a defensive perimeter, guiding us into their makeshift camp. It wasn't much, just ruined hab walls reinforced with sandbags and razor wire, but it felt like fortification, not fear. The chirurgeon rushed the boy into a med tent. I tried to follow, but Lyra stopped me. "Let him work," she said quietly. "If anyone can pull a miracle from the jaws of hell, it's a guard medic." So I waited outside. Hours passed. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, carrying smoke and the smell of burning rubber. Guardsmen returned from scouting runs with grim faces. "They're coming," one reported. "Warboss too. Heard him roaring orders," the lieutenant cursed. "We can't outrun them. Dig in." Soldiers took positions behind barricades. Heavy stubbers pointed toward the valley. Mines were planted. Vox units crackled with desperate chatter. If the Orks reached us, we were dead. Then the med tent flap opened. The chirurgeon stepped out, blood on his gloves, exhaustion in his eyes. "He'll live," he said. "But he won't walk." Relief punched the breath from my lungs. I moved toward the tent, but the chirurgeon caught my arm. "He's not out of danger, not by a long shot." Inside, the boy lay wrapped in clean gauze, hooked to IV lines and nutrient drip. His breathing was steady now, but shallow. His eyes opened as I approached. He saw me. He smiled, a weak, broken smile, but real. "You got me out?" he whispered. I sat beside him. "We did." His hand found mine, fingers trembling. "Promise you won't leave me." "I won't." Outside, thunder shook the earth. Not weather engines, Ork engines. The warboss had come to finish what he started. I stood. Fear settled deep in my chest, heavy as stone. The boy looked up at me. "Don't die." His voice was barely audible, but it carried more weight than any war order. I stepped outside into the rising storm. Guardsmen shouted positions. Rebels armed stolen guns. Lyra tightened her mask and looked at me. "Can you fight?" "No," I said. "But I will," she nodded. That was enough. The first Ork truck crested the ridge, roaring down the hillside in a storm of dust and gunfire. Behind it came more, dozens, maybe hundreds. The warboss himself stood atop a battle wagon, power claw raised, bellowing with murderous joy. Everyone around me braced for death, but I was done running. If this was where we died, then we would make the greenskins bleed for every inch. The battle came to us, and we met it with what little hope we had left. The battle did not begin with a roar. It began with a single lass shot, cracking across the valley like the first drop of rain before a storm. One guardsman pulled the trigger, and the Ork at the front of the charge exploded into green mist. For a moment there was silence, strange and fragile, like the battlefield itself was holding its breath. Then the world tore open. Trucks slammed into the ridge, tires shredding earth, engines screaming like tortured beasts. Sluggers spat fire, choppers rose. A wall of green muscle and roaring mouths thundered toward us. The warboss stood atop his battle wagon, power claw raised, a crude banner flapping behind him. He pointed at us, as if choosing which of us would die first. The battle wagon's guns opened fire. I hit the dirt as a shell tore through a sandbag wall, shredding 3 rebels into pieces. Guardsmen returned fire, lace guns flashing in disciplined volleys. Those red beams carved glowing scars across Ork flesh, dropping some, enraging others. Heavy stubbers rattled, filling the air with brass casings and gun smoke. The ground shook under my feet. I grabbed a laser gun from a fallen soldier and steadied myself behind a broken wall. My hands trembled, not from fear, though fear was there, coiled inside me, but from adrenaline. The boy's voice echoed in my head. "Don't die." I aimed and fired. The recoil buzzed up my arm. An Ork staggered and fell, rolling into the mud. Another barreled forward, screaming, only to be cut in half by a guardsman's autocannon. The rebels fought differently, frenzied, vicious, driven by hatred instead of training. They threw grenades, stabbed with scrap-made blades, used whatever they had. Orks loved that. Chaos excited them, and chaos was coming. The first truck smashed into our barricades. Orks leapt off, tumbling over each other, laughing, swinging their choppers. A guardsman met one head-on, a brave, futile gesture, and was cut down in a single blow. The orc bellowed triumph, only to be shot through the eye a moment later by Captain Lyra. She fired with calm precision, never wasting a shot. "Fall back to secondary cover," the lieutenant screamed. "Keep the lines tight." I followed Lyra, firing again, missing, firing again, hitting something. My vision blurred with sweat and smoke. Bullets struck stone inches from my head. Shrapnel bit into my shoulder. I barely felt it. Another explosion rocked the ridge. Our heavy stubber nest disappeared in a plume of dirt and flame. The machine gunner's scream cut short instantly. The orcs surged into the gap. The lieutenant blew his whistle. "Close ranks. Push them back!" He swung his bayonet like a sword. A rebel threw herself into the breach, firing a looted slugger until the magazine clicked empty, then smashing it into an orc's face. She bought 5 seconds, maybe 10, but the greenskins kept coming. A massive knob barreled through our line, roaring, sweeping aside 2 guardsmen with a swing of his huge chopper. His shadow fell over me. I tried to fire, but the lasgun clicked, empty. The knob laughed, tusks dripping with spit and blood. He raised his weapon, a shot blasted through his knee. He buckled, roaring, and Lyra was suddenly there, leaping, slashing her power knife across his throat. Green blood sprayed. The knob collapsed. She grabbed my arm and dragged me backward. "You're no good to us dead," she snapped. I barely heard her over the pounding in my skull. The earth shook again. Artillery shells exploded across the field, throwing soil and orcs into the air. The war boss laughed louder, delighted. He wanted this. He wanted us afraid. He wanted us to break, and we were close. The line faltered. Guardsmen fell back. Rebels screamed for ammunition. The lieutenant shouted for someone to bring up the missile launcher, but the crew had been torn apart. The entire ridge was collapsing into chaos and death. Then the med tent doors burst. Open. The boy staggered out, barefoot, unarmed, wrapped in gauze and misery. He should have been unconscious. He should have been dying. But he was standing, eyes wide, pupils shaking with terror and rage. "No!" I screamed, running toward him. "Get back inside!" He didn't hear me, or maybe he didn't care. The orcs had stolen everything from him, his childhood, his sanity, his dreams. They had carved nightmares into him with their tools and chemicals. He stumbled toward the war boss's battle wagon, as if drawn to it by a chain no one could see. The war boss saw him. The war boss laughed, and the boy screamed. Not in fear, but in fury, a sound no human his size should have been able to make. It cut through the battlefield like a blade. The orcs actually paused, confused. Something snapped inside me. I ran across the open ground, firing as I moved. Shots cracked past my head. A slug tore into my thigh. I fell, rolled, dragged myself forward. Lyra ran with me, firing, shouting. The lieutenant's voice rose again. "Cover them, move!" Guardsmen shifted fire, blasting orcs away from our path. The boy stumbled, collapsing to his knees. The war boss stomped toward him, power claw raised. The war boss wasn't rushing. He wanted to savor it. He wanted to kill slowly. I reached the boy, grabbing him, pulling him to my chest. His body was burning with fever. He looked up at me, lips trembling. "I don't want to go back," he whispered. "You won't." Behind us, Lyra emptied her magazine into the war boss's face. The bullet sparked against his armor. He roared, swatted her aside with his claw, and she crashed into a barricade, unmoving. Something inside me broke open. I stood. Not brave, not strong, just done. The war boss loomed over us, twice my size, roaring victory before he even swung. I lifted my empty lasgun like a club. The war boss raised his claw. A thunderclap split the sky, and a battle cannon shell slammed into the war boss's chest. Fire and blood exploded outward. The war boss staggered back, armor shredded, roaring in shock. Another cannon shot struck the battle wagon, flipping it onto its side in a blaze of promethium and shrapnel. Orks turned, confused, just in time to see the horizon light up with muzzle flashes. A Lehman Russ tank crested the ridge, its gun smoking, and behind it, ranks of Astra Militarum poured forward. Fresh troops, armored vehicles, chimeras roaring, reinforcements, real ones, for the Emperor. Their commander bellowed. The planes erupted into counterfire. Lasguns crackled like lightning. Mortars thumped. Heavy bolters hammered Orks apart. The greenskin charge faltered, then shattered. Some fled. Many died where they stood. The warboss tried to rise again. He didn't notice the tank rolling over him until its treads crushed him into the mud. The Orks broke. They were brave when they were winning. They were fearless when they were laughing. But when the fight turned against them, when they realized the prey had teeth, they ran, and the guard hunted them down. Hours later, when the sky turned crimson with sunset and the battlefield finally went quiet, I sat beside the boy again. He lay in a medical cot, wrapped tight, breathing slowly. The medics worked on him in shifts. He was stable, they said. He would live. I didn't know if that was a blessing or a cruelty. Captain Lyra rose on a stretcher nearby, bruised and broken, but alive. When she caught my eye, she nodded once. A promise kept. The lieutenant approached, smoking a thin, bitter low stick. He stared at the dead and the dying and the cratered earth. "We'll get you out of here," he said. "Off-world transport is coming. You'll have food, water, a chance to start over." I looked at the boy, at the rebels, at the guardsmen carrying bodies of friends they'd known for hours or years. I exhaled slowly. "Start over," I repeated. The words felt impossible, and yet, here we were. When dawn rose again, the battlefield was silent. The Orks were gone, scattered or dead. The rebels were loaded into transports. The boy slept on a stretcher beside me, his pulse steady, one small hand wrapped around mine. As the transport engines hummed to life, I stepped outside for one last moment beneath the broken sky. The wind smelled of blood and ash. Crows circled overhead. The ruins of the arena lay somewhere beyond the hills, half buried, half burning. For the first time since my capture, the horizon didn't look like a prison. It looked like a door. Maybe the Imperium would collapse one day. Maybe the Orks would return. Maybe the galaxy would drown in chaos, darkness, and fire. The future was a monster with too many teeth. But today, we had bought a future. Not for everyone, not for most, but for the boy, for me, for the ones who refused to die quietly as the transport doors closed, and the world outside disappeared behind steel walls. I whispered the only truth I had left. We survived, and in the grim darkness of the far future, that alone was a rebellion.